Welcome, everybody, to the Success Elevated podcast. As always, I'm your host, Hayden Lee, and I am joined this week by a very special guest, owner of Restoration One in Greater Charlotte and Winston-Salem, Ron Jones. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Ron.
Thanks for having me, Hayden.
This is really, really fun for me. You've been a client of ours here at Spot On Solutions for a little while now. And while here, I'm not your direct account manager, I hear about a lot of the awesome things you guys are doing over in Greater Charlotte and Winston-Salem. And this is going to be fun for me to pick your brain a little bit and learn a little bit about how you've had some success over the years. We were talking before we started recording about you're a very modest guy, Ron, and I appreciate that about you. And I think you've done some really cool things, and I'm excited to learn a little bit today. And hopefully, not hopefully, because I know our audience is, we have a lot of restoration owners that listen to this podcast, and I know they're going to get a lot of really cool value out of this. So I'm excited to dive right into this. This will be fun.
Looking forward to it.
Okay. All right. So first things first, Ron, I would love for our audience to kind of learn a little bit more about who you are and maybe talk a little bit about your background in the industry, because you don't have necessarily, before you purchased these franchises and started managing them, you didn't have a background in restoration. So maybe talk a little bit about your career and what kind of led you to the point of purchasing an R1 franchise.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I definitely come at this from a completely different approach than most people have run into in our industry. My background is in information technology, 20 plus years, most of it in executive leadership. During that part of my career, I balanced everything from, I was a developer at the beginning, then I moved over into the IT operations, supporting people. I moved into consulting. I quickly worked up the ranks to become a managing consultant and then the director of the consulting practice, where I worked with some extremely cool clients, CNN, Aetna, State
Oh, wow,
Healthcare,
that is cool. Wow, that's awesome.
Navy Reserve, right? So I built a lot of really cool stuff with them. After that stint of consulting, I went into outsourcing. I ran a very large data center in Miami, 172,000 square foot data center, where we were connected to an undersea cable that wrapped all the way around Latin America. And we had, again, that, Fortune 100 type clients as our customer. Left that, we did some more consulting across the state of Florida. And then I ended the last 10 years of my career where I was hired by a financial services firm to come in and cut their infrastructure cost. They were about 65%. And this firm, over my 10 years there, grew to manage $840 billion of other people's money. We had staff in 52 countries. And that's, kind of what you and I've talked about a little bit, Hayden, already, about how I manage that staff when they're around the globe 24/7. And how do you do that in a way where you can make decisions and grow? And I know you'll get into it, but it's about knowing your numbers and knowing your metrics. So
that is the whole thing is fascinating to me. I have a very minimal knowledge of IT. One of my growing up in my hometown, our next door neighbor, if you could call it that, I live out in the country. So my next door neighbor was half a mile down the road, but next door neighbor owned like a wireless internet company, as well as he did IT for several small businesses here in Blackfoot. And it was real, fairly basic stuff. It was just like networking computers and getting everybody running on the same system. It was very, very basic stuff, but that world has always fascinated me to an extent of so much of our day runs on information technology, right? Like so much of in the palm of our hands, right? Our cell phones, there's more power there than there was in the nicest computers 20 years ago, right? So like there's so much capability and technology out there that it's hard to not be fascinating, I guess, is the big thing. And you've probably seen over your career, up until obviously working with Restoration One, but over your career, you probably saw huge changes in the world, right? When it came to just pieces of technology, there was probably something new. You guys were probably having to learn new products or new softwares or whatever it might be all the time. how did you and your team, especially spread out over the world, 52 countries, how did you find a way to like pivot all the time? Because I'm sure you had to. I guess I'm making some assumptions there, but
Yeah,
how did
you're
you
dead
find
on.
ways to pivot all the time?
Well, I mean, it's about creating a learning environment within your organization and constantly reevaluating and repositioning yourself as well as your team. Yeah, I mean, technology. I got a lot of gray hair, and when I started in technology, we were on green screens. I didn't have a PC on my desk.
Right.
In fact, the first place I worked at still had punch card readers, and I mean that's going way, way back. Thank goodness I never worked with a punch card, but yeah. So I got to see us, migrate over to that and migrate over to PCs, and then really where I made my career is the cost that companies were spending on managing that infrastructure as that infrastructure really quickly took over, and the amount that PCs were costing and what the network were costing, and then you become so reliant on that infrastructure, and then you have an outage, and what's that cost to the company? Again, you take $840 billion, and you stop that money moving in the market. What's the cost to the economy? And those are the things that I had to understand and manage too, at the last job, right? So and even outsourcing, a lot of Fortune 100s were wanting to put their infrastructure in LATAM to lower their cost. Well, do they really want to put their infrastructure in LATAM? And this is, going back to 1999, 2000, 2001, about the time we saw the dot-com bust. So that's how we built up this huge data center in Miami. Is we're going to put it as close as you can to Latin America, but we're not going to put your infrastructure in Latin America, right? So,
Right.
and just watching that evolution to now where it's all about cloud computing, right? I mean, we
Right.
were cloud computing before cloud computing was even heard and known and sexy, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I've got to watch some really cool things. I think some of it's really good for humanity. I also question some of it and go, I don't like how that's turning out, right?
Right.
So my kids walking around with a phone in their face all the time and not connecting with people. That's not really what any of us saw happening in the 80s and 90s when I got started, right? So
Oh yeah. That whole world, I'm sure, is just, yeah, it's crazy for you because you kind of had an inside track on it for a long time. And I loved what you said there when you were talking, Ron, about having a team that you called, did you call it a learning process or a learning
learning environment,
learning
right?
environment? That's right. Where like,
Constantly learning.
yeah, you just create an environment where like, hey, we're always going to be learning new things. It probably doesn't apply quite as intensely as your career, but in the marketing space and in with Google, and there's seemingly a new change with how we're supposed to do things every week, right? Where we'll get an email and it'll seem kind of an unobscure or an obscure email from Google saying like, oh, we're going to change a couple of things, but those couple of things end up completely shaping how we as digital marketers help our clients, right? And so it's always, and having that environment to be willing to learn and grow and change how you do things all the time, I think is hugely important, and not just applicable to our spaces, but I think any home service industry, any industry that you might work in, like having an environment where you can learn, and your teammates and your employees can learn, can really make all the difference, because
And those
you're
are
gonna
some
have.
of the things that we're definitely trying to tackle in my small company, but we're also trying to tackle in our network, right? How do
Yeah.
we, as we are being squeezed as a restorer, right? Our costs are going up every day. But at the same time, the insurance company is still wanting to pay off a price list from years and years and years ago. We have to be smarter, and we have to start leveraging technology where in the past you didn't, to start allowing you to still make the margins you're looking at. So this is something that is ingrained in our mission, our vision of my small little company, about how we leverage technology to continue to provide an amazing service to our customers.
Ron, let's talk a little bit about about that transitioning into this restoration space. You talk about kind of what your mindset is here at your company. If you wouldn't mind, maybe talk to our audience, a little bit about that transition period where you decided maybe IT wasn't what you wanted to do into the future, and what maybe pushed you to purchase an R1 franchise and start in a partnership with Restoration One.
Yeah. So, I mean, after 10 years at the previous job, I did what I was hired to do. I was hired to lower the cost, and we were 65% of IT when I started. And when I left, we were 22% of IT. And I would actually say that we probably went too far with reducing the cost of infrastructure, but I wasn't needed anymore. So I was laid off, parted ways, nice severance package. And I started looking around to what's next. And we had made the move from South Florida to Charlotte we thought that was a better environment for our kids to be raised. I'm from deep South Alabama. My wife is from Connecticut, and we were living in Boca Raton, which is this, little bubble of the world where things are not necessarily reality. And we wanted our kids to be raised with more homegrown roots. And as I'm looking for that next job, everybody wanted me to move to California, everybody wanted me to move to New York, and that just didn't fit what my wife and I wanted for our family. So she looked at me and said, look, I've watched you do 3 startups. I've watched you make a lot of money for other people. Why don't we do it ourselves? And I'm like, okay, I don't know that I want to be in IT though. And I know that's a strange decision, but I wasn't really, I don't know. I wanted something that was next. So I started looking at franchise models, and I looked at, 30, 40 franchise models. And I looked at 3 different restoration models. And what I liked about Restoration One is it was more of an executive model. They were recruiting owners, not from our space, but they were recruiting Fortune 100, Fortune 500 executives that understand customer sat, understand P&Ls, understand things like learning environments. And you're going to take a different approach. And that's, if you meet with a lot of R1 owners, I mean, there's 2 or 3 CIOs. There's a bunch of, senior marketing people that were at Fortune 500 companies. So they were looking at more of an executive model. How do you, build that managed environment? Excuse me. And it wasn't the chuck in the truck that some of the models I had talked to. They wanted me to go be the guy in the truck. And, at that point, I was soon to be 50 years old, not in the best health. And I'm like, I don't see myself crawling in a crawl space and cleaning up poop or cleaning up after a dead body. But, so that was the difference between, the other restoration models and R1. But then I liked that I could see a fairly aggressive revenue growth if done right, as well as they use the term recession proof. I don't think anything is recession proof, but I do think it was recession resistant. So I felt like, and again, coming from that hedge fund administration space, I'm very, cognizant about what goes on with the markets. So those were kind of the main reasons, and kind of the icing, on the cupcake for me was I met with their sales guy, and they said, look, 0 to 500, we've got that run book in place. We know how to get you there. 500 to a million is a different run book. It's a different set of leadership and thought processes. And at mil to 2 mil is a different set of hurdles. And we have consultants in place that's going to help you all the way through that. And I walked out of that meeting and looked at my wife and said, we found our solution. And cool. 60 days later, we opened the doors.
Wow. It seems like, and again, Ron, we talked about this kind of before we started recording, but it seems like you applied a lot of that research and the data just to making a decision about what franchise to even go in, right? Like even before you opened your doors, you were like, okay, we got to do all the research. We're going to check all these boxes. And yeah, Restoration One, I think, provides a really, really cool model where, just how you explained, where they're going to help you grow at every step along the way. They want you to grow, right? Like they say what you will, they want to do it selfishly because it helps them grow as a corporation. But at the end of the day, they care about who you are in your business, right? Like that. Yeah. That like they want to see you succeed. because ultimately it helps them succeed as well. So
Absolutely. And I definitely, and I'm watching, R1 mature over the last 5 years, and we're seeing
yeah,
more and more of that, and some of the things that they're bringing to the table, and some of the relationships that they've partnered with outside of a Restoration One, which, I don't see other brands doing, right? I mean, um, we've got a huge partnership with Viola, we got a huge partnership with DeWalt.
yeah.
They just announced a partnership with REITs, and all of that goes into that same learning environment we talked about that I'm doing in my small little company, that how they're doing, across the entire brand.
Love it. So cool. Um, I want to dive in a little further, Ron. So you purchased a franchise, you said 5 years ago, right?
August to be 6 years. Yep.
It'll be 6 years. And along the way, you've purchased more areas and tried to kind of grow your business into the Greater Charlotte and now Winston-Salem area, right? And I'd love to hear maybe some of the challenges that you faced. You don't have to go into super specific detail, but what are some of the challenges that you've faced as you've grown over the last 5 years, and what are some things you've done to kind of maybe mitigate some of those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest challenge has been my ego. We
Okay.
had some success up front, and it got me some notoriety. And the next thing I know, it was literally in year two, I'm being asked to partner and open up offices in states away, right? So I
Yeah.
was year two and had 5 offices, and then partners on 3 of those, and the partners wanted to go storm chase. We had a hurricane hit North Carolina, had a hurricane that hit the Panhandle, and I had no business to be storm chasing. I had no business to be having 5 offices, in multiple states at not even 2 years in business. I put my first 2 locations in jeopardy by allowing my ego to get in the way. And I've spent, the last 2 or 3 years pulling my company out of, some hardships, quite frankly, that my ego put us in.
Yeah. I, to go back to the ego thing, how have you been able to like overcome that, right? Is there something specific you've done, or do you feel like it's taken some of those humbling moments to realize, okay, I've got to focus more on the business and the people than maybe necessarily just trying to explode and purchase all of these locations? Is there been something specific that you think you could kind of hit on?
Yeah, some definitely humbling moments. I've also had a very loyal team. I've had a great team on my
Yeah.
staff. As I mentioned, I've had a triple master on staff since we opened. I've got a gentleman that's my operations manager. He used to be a Surf Pro owner. He's a triple master. He been in the market for 23 years, and I think that's part of the success is, he's got that old school, this is the way we've always done it, TPA approach, and here I come in with a, completely different approach, and he and I, you know, cuss and discuss and then come up with a solution, and things don't always work. We monitor it, we measure it, and if it doesn't work, we make a change, right? And
Yeah.
we keep doing that until we find something that does work. Um, we shrunk back to just our 2 territories, and most recently in September this year, I bought 3 more territories in the Charlotte market. So Charlotte is exploding for us. Yeah, I mean, so it's we had to put the ego in check. We had to, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, and allow the, you know, people to challenge me and learn from what they've done, and then bring a new approach and come up with a more creative approach, if that makes sense.
Love it. No, Ron, almost to almost to a guest, almost to every single one of our guests that we've had on the show that has owned a business. Um, they've talked about, really at the end of the day, it kind of comes down to one thing. They've seen success in growing their business when they start bringing in people that, like you said, are smarter than themselves, right? When they start delegating some of these things to somebody else, almost immediately they start to see some growth within the business, right? And it's fascinating for me because I don't own a business, and I hope to one day own my own, but it's fascinating for me because almost every single guest that has owned a business has said something to that effect of like, it was hard at first and we were trying to figure things out, but as soon as I hired this person, or as soon as I got this team member in place, or as soon as I trained this person or maybe elevated them to a different position, our business just exploded and took off. And it's fascinating for me. It's really cool because it motivates me to, hey, I got to surround myself with good people that are smarter than myself, which generally is most people. But it helps me understand that, like, hey, like, you've got to be willing to delegate some of these things, and that's when you're going to see real growth, real success.
And that's, quite frankly, that's how I led in IT. I definitely was the smartest guy in that, in that level of IT infrastructure that I was running.
Yeah.
I'm just a dumb guy from Alabama that never even got a degree. And I'm sitting in New York with some extremely bright people, but or Amsterdam or Geneva with people that have been, that are doctors in what we're talking about. And quite frankly, it was a little liberating because I could easily say I'm the dumbest guy in the room, therefore I can ask the stupid questions. And I did take that approach at the beginning of Restoration One. And I had to go back to, okay, I'm not the smartest guy. How can I learn from everybody else?
Yep. Love that. Maybe, and while you're talking about maybe some of those shared experiences between IT and Restoration One, maybe talk a little bit more. We again talked before we started recording, and I spoke with Derek, who is my boss, but a good friend of yours, about how you've talked about a lot over the last several years about how knowing your numbers is crucial for what you guys are doing at Restoration One of Greater Charlotte and Winston-Salem. How is it important, or why do you think it's important for a restoration owner or just any business owner really to really know their true numbers?
Yeah, I mean, well, not coming from this industry, number one. Number two, I've always had the approach of I'll try anything for a while.
Yeah.
But if I'm going to try something, I want to track what the benefit of it is. I'm not going to make a knee-jerk reaction of I got this bad phone call over the weekend and I still got charged for it, therefore I'm going to shut down this lead source. No, give me 90 days, give me 180 days, and at the end of the day, what is my cost of client acquisition as an example? So, we'll try anything. We'll put a timeline to it. We'll set a target market of what we're looking on their return, and then we track to it. And I tell the vendor up front, this is what we're looking for. I mean, I've had that discussion with Derek. I mean, and he and I are very close, but at the end of the day, this is the return I'm looking for. If you can help me get there, great. But no, that's been ingrained in the way I think since, I was a director in my early 20s. I was a VP, I think, at 30, 31. So, and in startups and, seeing organizations literally go from, 4 or 5 consultants to having 80 consultants in 2 years. And at some of the level of clients that I mentioned earlier, you have to be able to track what's going on and put metrics in place to understand, are you providing the benefit that you said you were going to provide, right? You can't get a bad name in the industry. So how do you look for leading indicators or trailing indicators to let so you can make decisions? And most recently, at this financial services firm, having staff 24/7, how can I make sure that we are taking care of the important stuff when the money stops moving in the market? How do we make sure we get that up and running quickly so it's not impacting our client's business? You can only do that with metrics. There's no way I could know every email and every ticket and everything that was going on in my infrastructure. I had to look at trends and then select the most important things at the top to watch closely.
I love that. Derek, Derek, and I'm sure you've heard this analogy, but Derek talks a lot about ROI, and he compares it to like a slot machine, right? Which is that if you put $1 in and you get $2, $3, $4 out, if you're getting a positive ROI and getting a good return, that's awesome, right? And so but in order to do that, I think the piece, that's kind of an oversimplification. In order to really understand if you are getting a positive return from that slot machine, right, is you've got to know your numbers, and you have to know all the inputs that go into that. Your hourly rates that you're paying your employees, what it costs to acquire that customer, that client, costs of materials, whatever it might be. You've got to know every single one of your numbers, and so so that you can ensure that you're getting a good return on your investment. And I think a lot of clients, no, I shouldn't say a lot of clients, but I've spoken to people in the past that don't necessarily track that as accurately as they should. And I think their business might be successful and it might be doing well. And, because at the end of the year, everybody gets a bonus, right? Or whatever they might do to track it, but they're not accurately figuring out, okay, what's the health of this business? What are we doing that sets us apart? What is just our return on all of our efforts here? And something as simple as just, it's taking the time to, okay, slow down, figure out what all the inputs are, and then what you're actually getting in return. I think.
I mean, just take kind of what you guys do from a marketing and internet spend. I mean, you can spend a lot of money quickly on the internet.
Yes.
And your internet provider can be doing a heck of a job, but your ROI could be crap. And you have to start looking at what, do you know how to answer the phone? Do you know how to convert on the phone? What's your conversion rates on the phone? If that's not well, you could lose money on internet spend. Once you send that technician or your project manager or whoever out to close the job, what's his close ratio? Is that accurate for our industry? If it's not and it's low, it could look like, your internet provider is doing a bad job. In reality, you've got another issue, right? Which is you're not closing well. And, you still may be making a decent margin, but you're only closing at 40% and you should be at 60%. If what could you be doing if you figured out how to close a little better, right? So you have to drill in at the numbers at all those levels to understand where you have issues or where you have opportunities to grow specifically, before you make a decision of, okay, that marketing vendor's not working, or this CE course that we're trying to do is not working, or plumbing work is not working. What's your return? What and not just that top line on the return, but what's the various intermittent metrics that could cause that top line metric to look bad.
Yeah, you're right. You can oversimplify it if you're too careful, right? Or if you're not too careful, you can oversimplify and say, well, we spent this much this month and we got this much revenue. Oh, it was a great month, or, oh, it wasn't a good month. But if you're not willing to drill down and say, okay, how did we answer the phones? What were the quality of the leads coming in? Were they even good? Maybe they were all, a type of lead that's not going to work for us, right? What are the phone calls coming from renters or homeowners? There's a million different things. And so it's just looking at the revenue numbers, right? We spent this much and we got this much. It's an oversimplification, and it can cause issues, especially it's probably hard to look at it even on a month-to-month basis, because oftentimes you'll do a job one month and not get paid for several months, right? Like with insurance, it's probably hard to track it on necessarily a month-to-month, just because you're waiting to get paid from insurance at times.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've always thought this, because again, I've worked in big companies and most big companies work on an accrual basis.
Yeah.
As a small company, taxes is based off of, cash accounting. So when I'm doing those analyses and I'm looking at what my marketing spend is and what my return is, I'm going to look at an accrual. I want to look at what I spent this month and what my invoice was this month, not what I collected, because you're right. There is that 30, I wish it was 30. It's more like 45 and 50-day lag right now with getting paid from the insurance companies, right. and those spends won't line up correctly.
Yeah, it can be a challenge for sure. I want to also hit on, Ron, you have a very unique, and you've touched on it a little bit with the purchasing of the franchises and then the new areas that you've done over the years. But you have I think a really unique and special relationship with Restoration One, and kind of have an insider's look into what the future is going to hold for them as a corporation, as a national franchisor. Maybe speak a little bit about that. What does the future look like for Restoration One? What are you working on as part of their team? Because you kind of have almost an inside track as to what the future is going to look like for R1 franchisees.
Yeah, I mean, well, so R1's gone through a couple levels of major changes, right? So about the time that I joined is when Gary Finley had taken on, and Gary in his first year grew us from 25 franchisees to 125, 130, and I was like number 103, 104. That leadership was all about franchising. They didn't necessarily understand, and in fact, if you watched Undercover Boss, Gary jokes about he doesn't know the difference between an air mover and a DU, right?
Yeah.
One of the things as we kept growing that we started to run into is it was great for growth. It was great to get our brand out. But we needed to now kind of go to the next level, which is we need people that understand restoration helping drive the franchise. So a PE firm bought Restoration One. I don't know the exact dates, but I want to say it was a year and a half, 2 years ago. And, they started bringing in some new leaders from the industry, and, also franchising, but from the industry, right? So Sherry Rose joined us. We've had Tom join us, and some other, I don't want to get through the entire list, but I mean, these guys are deep in our industry. And on Tom, you take Tom, he's been on the franchisee perspective side as well as he's been on the franchisor side. So having those guys join and then having that PE firm also join has allowed us to escalate a little bit or elevate. And we've always had part of our brand is we're anti-TPA. I mean, are there some owners that are TPA? Absolutely, right? And
Right.
You're going to have that, but we don't chase the insurance company. We are more about, finding our own leads, and therefore we can do things a little different than other franchisors. Not saying our model's better or wrong, it's just different. Part of the maturation that we've seen them go through is they are actively getting feedback from the franchisees, and they're actively working on that feedback. And part of that feedback was more franchisee involvement. Now, I've just part of my personality, I've always been extremely vocal. If they got a question, I don't have much of a filter, and I tell them exactly what I think. They have allowed me to do that, and quite well, accepted. I try not to be, aggressive or bash them, but I'll tell them quickly if I don't think things are going well. Well, part of this feedback process, they in hearing from the franchisees, they needed more involvement. They decided to create an advisory committee, which they've used at other franchisors, and they went through a process with that advisory committee of nominations and voting by the franchisee. So it wasn't a selection by corporate, and I got the blessing, quite frankly, of being voted by my peers to be part of this. So yeah, I mean, we're definitely at the table. We're not telling them necessarily what they want to hear. And quite frankly, of the 6 of us in the room, we don't necessarily, because the way we grew and almost a Wild Wild West approach, the way I run my business is not the way, Scott, which is the president of the group, ran his business. And Scott's extremely successful. So, it's kind of interesting to get these 6, people that grew businesses completely different approaches. Who does rebuild? Who doesn't do rebuild? Who's in contents? Who's mint only? Who's internet led? Who's plumber led? Who's insurance? We have one of them that is on the TPA. And then you've got, the franchisor in the room, and we don't always agree among the franchisees and the franchisor, but it's interesting to see how bringing all those opinions together, we are able, and we've only had 2 meetings so far, but I can already see a change in things that they're doing, things that they thought was right. And we're, going, no, that can't continue. It's costing us money. It's a bad spend. They're making those changes. They're listening, which is huge. If they weren't listening, I think most of us say, hey, we've got a business to run, and bow out. The other thing they've asked me to do, because of my deep technology background, is to put together a technology committee. And I'm in the middle of people, saying that they want to be part of it. And then I got to work with, the R1 corporate representative that's going to help lead that. And we're going to set up a technology committee to see how we at R1 adopt more technology, right? I've always been on the bleeding edge of technology in R1. I was the first to, use Matterport. I was the first to use you guys.
Yeah.
You guys are now an approved vendor. I was the first to use DocuSketch. Now DocuSketch is an approved vendor. And so we are, very forward thinking, or try to be forward thinking, in how we leverage technology to provide, as I mentioned, a better service. So yeah, I mean, I do get a different inside view of what's going on at the franchisor level because of some of the opportunities they've afforded me.
No, that's incredible. And I think the big takeaway for me, again, just learning about this from you, is the franchisor, the Restoration One, is just willing to listen to the franchisees, right? And I've even seen that before even talking to you. I've seen that over the last couple of months. So recently I got forwarded an email from one of my R1 clients that talked about how there was a handful of R1 clients that were having a problem with reviews on their Google business profile. Again, this is probably some insider talk. So for my audience that maybe doesn't understand a lot of this, I apologize. But Google business profile, your reviews that are on like your maps listing and everything, those reviews are crucial to your business, and it helps you rank better on the internet. It helps people decide whether or not they're going to use you as a company. Well, there was a handful of franchisees, R1 franchises, that were having problems with reviews getting removed. And within a month, which for a large national corporation is pretty fast, within a month, R1 corporate had just, hey, we've partnered with this particular software to try and mitigate this issue. And they sent out a company-wide email to everybody that was having problems with this. And, one of my clients forwarded it on to me, and we'll see if it'll actually help and work. And I hope it does. But even just the act of making an attempt to try and fix this is a huge step in the right direction. And it's really cool for me to see, hey, I care about my clients, and those clients, a handful of them happen to be R1 franchises, but it's really cool to see, hey, there's also a huge national corporation that also cares about my clients and their success. And something as simple as hey, we've partnered with a software that's going to try and help solve some of these issues. That's huge. That's super, super cool.
Yeah, I mean, but I can give you example after example after example.
I'm sure you could have 10 of those, right?
There at the beginning, everybody talked about how to draw a structure, but they weren't teaching owners how to run their business, how to be successful at their business. That's what spawned the Viola conversation. I mean, you're not going to Viola to talk about how to draw a structure. You're going to Viola to talk about how to build a culture within your company, how to build your sales department, how to learn to negotiate, how to run a business, right? And they made that change last year. And it's the same thing. If we want the best drawing ability, they brought DeWalt to the table. So instead of saying, hey, we're going to be the expert, no, let's go find the expert in the industry. And one of the things that we discussed in our first franchise advisory committee, literally November time, was that this back to this learning environment. How do we get videos in place that the owners can use with their techs on a daily basis and create that learning environment? Why can't we have 5-minute videos that you start off your morning meeting with every morning with that text? And the answer had been in the past, well, we're going to create our own. Well, why? There are people out there that are good at that. And they went out and saw REITs, and they just announced, so I think it's okay that I say it, but they announced it on a company-wide call a couple of weeks ago. They've partnered with REITs, and they're going to start using the REITs videos, which they're amazing at that, right? So there is example after example after example of them listening to the franchisees and now the FAC to make those changes.
Oh, so cool. So cool. I'm beyond excited for what the future holds for both R1 as a corporation, but for you as a franchisee. I think there's a lot of cool things coming down the pipe. And I don't know, just hearing you talk about that gets me excited that hey, they're listening. They want us to succeed. They want the franchisee to succeed. And so I'm hopeful that that continues into the future. It's really, really awesome.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I said to them 2-3 years ago, and part of my issues that I got into with my ego, and the way franchising works and the way you pay your royalties, it's all about top line revenue, right? But there's a book out there called The Balanced Scorecard that talks about and they use an example of getting on a plane today, and the pilot coming over the airline and saying, I'm only going to worry about airspeed today. I don't care about elevation. I don't care about direction. I'm only going to worry about airspeed. Well, if you're only looking at top line revenue, that's equivalent to that pilot only looking at airspeed. Right. And will that company be around in 5 years if they're not looking at other things like, what are you taking home to mom, right? Are you taking care of your employees? So there's other aspects than just top line revenue, and it's a little different to hear a franchisor actually parrot that information back to you about, well, no, we got to make sure that this is a healthy company or they won't be around.
So cool. Love all of that. Well, Ron, thank you. This has been fascinating and eye-opening for me to hear you talk about what you guys are doing and your business, as well as just your career. I think there's a lot of really cool pieces of information there. And I know that our listeners are going to get a lot of really cool value out of this and hearing you talk about so many of the cool things that you're working on. But Ron, I want to close, but I want to close with the same 3 rapid fire, if you will, questions that we ask all of our guests. I messaged you before about this, and I hope that you don't feel too much pressure on these questions, but I'm excited to ask them to you because it's been fun for me. This will be episode 50. Your episode will be episode 50 that'll come out, and it's been fun for me to hear from 50 other guests their answers to these questions. So I'm excited to ask them to you real quick. First things first, favorite book or podcast that you're reading or listening to right now, or maybe that you've read recently that you've just really loved?
Yeah, I struggle with that one because there's a lot of books I've read, and we could talk about extreme ownership. We could talk about,
that's a great one. It's a great one.
Profit First. But I think the one that probably had the biggest impact on me is Rich Dad Poor Dad, right? And the concepts, and I've given that book to now as my sons are teenagers and going off to college, and even kids that have lived with us from we've been a billet family for hockey kids, and watching that change the way they think, right? And I wish I had taken my own advice a lot earlier when it comes to how you think that concept through. I don't know if you've read Rich Dad Poor Dad, but
I haven't.
A dad that works for a government that's always poor. He's looking at getting money on his salary and is always struggling financially, and his best friend's dad, which was into small business and how do you put your money to work for you to generate wealth for you and your family. And it's just a complete different dichotomy of the way a lot of our kids are raised, of go get a good job versus go start your own thing and maybe start multiple things.
Love it. Next question. I know you wear a lot of hats and are doing a lot of different things as owner of several businesses, but how do you relax at the end of a long day, Ron? How do you recharge the batteries?
Yeah, it's 2 things. It's I got 3 boys, so we like to play games between the 3 of us, and we all between the 4 of us, and also the family likes time on the water, right? Boating, jet skiing, diving. So it's those 2 things. It's family oriented, but those are the things that we like to do.
Love it. Last question, Ron. I don't want to keep you too much, but if you could rewind to the beginning of your career, either the beginning of your career in IT or maybe just the beginning of your career with Restoration One, what would be one thing that you would tell yourself?
I wish I'd started a small business way before I did, not wait till I was almost 50 years old. And back to that Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Love that. Is there any particular, I mean, the concept of using your wealth or using your money to generate wealth for your family, but is there any other, I guess, benefits that you've seen to just owning your own business, maybe the freedom to it, or whatever it might be?
It's the freedom. It's the opportunities, right? And my oldest kid is going off he's a freshman in college now. Very extremely proud of him, and he's actually doing entrepreneurial studies. That's cool. And that's kind of what we've talked about is, by the way, I don't know, I mean, we've got 2 franchisees that I look up to. These guys are not even, I don't even think they're 30 yet. But they came out of college with entrepreneurial studies, and they are running a phenomenal business that I look up to and go, man, how do I learn from you? And they're sub 30. I wish I had done that. That's kind of what I'm hoping my kid does.
Oh, that's so cool. Love that. Ron, thank you again so much for coming on the show. This has been eye-opening for me. It's been fun for me to learn from you and pick your brain. And I know our audience is going to feel the same way, but again, just thank you, especially such short notice, but really appreciate you coming on the show.
I appreciate you, and it's been definitely enjoyable.
Yeah, it's been super fun. So thanks again for coming on, and we hope to have you on in the future.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
This has been Success Elevated, making you a little bit better one show at a time. Thanks for joining us. Please subscribe on YouTube or any other major podcast platform to listen to more episodes. We are proudly brought to you by Spot On Solutions, If you'd like to learn more about how we can help you grow your business, please check us out at spotonsolutions.com.